first round table. We're going to talk about the outlook in investment funds. What will be the model for distribution of investments? Fanny Brios, Vice President of ISG, Director of the Distribution Unit for Asset Distribution, Mr. Van der Velde, General Manager, Mr. Antonio Baratelli, Head Investment Management Union, and we are going to talk together. Please come up and be seated. This is our first panel. Well, at my level, modestly speaking, now, true. Let me point out something. We're going to speak French. All of you are bilingual, but I'm joking. You have headsets. You have equipment. It's very easy. All you have to do is connect the cable to the wire to have sound, and you can listen to the discussion in English or French. Many subjects were proposed by the Commission. Mrs. Fanny Wirtz, I'm going to start with you. Fanny Wirtz, your background includes different types of aspects of funds management, and questions arise now, which at a strategic level, what is the situation now in discussions? What are the proposals that you put forward? Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Yves de Bradier said, I went through the cold and the snow, and went through all that. So let's go back to your question. The first point is to start with the interests of the capital market and the strategic interests that it represents for Europe. Europe needs to develop its autonomy. The capital market is an essential element here. We need to finance transformations at a deeper level, at the European level. Our states are over-indebted. We know that. We're heavy debts. The banks have limited capacities by different constraints, and financial needs are huge if we talk about financing and energy transition, digital transition, retirement, and so on. It is believed 750 billion per year. That's what the financial needs are. What are the objective of the capital market? The objective for 2015 was twofold. First of all, to reduce dependency on bank credit. Second point, which is absolutely essential, to remedy the fragmentation of the European market. This was partly achieved, first of all, because companies are still too dependent on banking financing. 75% of the company financing, the figure is 25% in the USA, and the market is too fragmented in Europe. And we see this in distribution of funds when we talk about our transporter industry. What about households? Of course, it's crucial, it's strategic for us to be able to motivate households and individuals to invest for the European economy. The savings are a problem. The European households, it's 90% of the GDP in Europe. It's only 36% in the USA. Development then and motivation of households for savings to support European investment. It's absolutely crucial. So this is a strategic subject for all of us. For that, we must offer and we must act to offer diversified products in savings for households. I'd like to stress that Europe is now very much tied to capital markets, and I'm going to let our friend Tanguy talk. But European strategy then aimed to orient this savings for households. There's a positive point here, and I think we have to improve the offer available to households. If you allow me, Mr. Antonio Baratelli, Head of Investment Management Unit, what, for you, are the positive points of the proposal which are now discussed in Parliament, and what are the points to be improved? Thanks, and good afternoon. We can hear you. Thank you. Closer to the mic, please. The proposal, then, it's a very important one for the reasons that our friend just mentioned, because we do need in Europe to develop capital markets, and the proposal is a sincere one. It's part of this prospect. As for ESMA, we view favorably the points here mentioned here. We've already talked about that. In particular, I'd like to mention the proposal by the Commission about undue costs. We worked on this very closely and in past years with the national authorities. This is supervisory work at the national level. It's about obligations to indicate undue costs, and then there's a certain number of other problems mentioned, in particular the absence of harmonization in terms of definition of this notion. So this proposal is along those lines, and our proposal then was welcomed, and this has led to a certain number of principles to specify this notion and to make it possible for national authorities to carry out supervisory work, and this is necessary. The second part, and that's very important, that's about the PRIPS part. There too, European authorities have expressed themselves about it. The Commission includes a whole series of proposals. In a few words now, one, to have a dashboard and also more digitalization so that kids could be adapted to the new technologies. And there are also other elements about sustainability. We can be more or less in agreement with in the details about sustainability, but that is the right orientation. There's another important point in this kit, the lack of disclosure principles in past performances. We think it's very important for funds. These principles have to be reintegrated into the kits and not to have necessarily included performance scenarios. So this wasn't in the Commission's proposals, but in the Parliament there was a proposal along those lines, and there's lots of other issues. Thank you. That's already a good beginning. Mr. Tanguy van der Werf, thanks for coming. You're General Director of FMA. And there's a whole theory of, there's a whole set theory, these proposals, and we can talk about that there. And what is in them and what isn't there? How can you deal with this question? What would you say about, first of all, what isn't in there? Well, it's about indictments that was on the European Commission's agenda some time ago. This is based on a collective efforts, France is included, and it didn't reach the threshold of the European Union threshold, so we have a partial inducement principles defined. So there's recognition of the importance of access to advice, and I think it's very important for us. With the essential thing, and with respect to increasing participation in capital markets, it's access to quality consulting at a reasonable price. That's the first thing. Secondly, some of you keep close track of the Commission's work. Recently, there's the idea of developing what the Commission called personalized strategic strategic asset allocation. This project was not put through. There are lots of good things, as Antonio said. The IDD, the right fit, that's a good example too. And also the reference to the reference is very essential too. I've been working for 24 years in this Brussels bubble. I've represented different lobbies in terms of financial markets, and it is sure from 2000, 2015, 20, financial markets were not mentioned in the European bodies, and this was viewed as a trick to avoid regulations by the industry, whereas it could be a pillar in terms of investments and retail participation in capital markets. Good news too, value for money, another concept. We agree on the principle, the concept of value for money, and we're going to talk about, I'm sure, that there's some reservations expressed about the way the Commission understands, views the optimization of these benchmarks. which are totally inappropriate. And there's a fact that markets at the national levels are very different. And so the use of a European benchmark is not relevant. Let me give you some figures in this sector. And I know you play with figures every day. Here we're talking in France, 4,600 billion euros, 700 asset management companies, which in asset management, performance management. France is number one in terms of asset management in Europe. That's why we're very pleased to hear you, Mrs. Fanny Wurtz. Your voice is important. What are the proposals that you have in this context? We're now brainstorming now. We'd like to hear some good ideas. That's a very good point to strengthen, to back up what Tanguy and Daniel said. Our strategy, is going in that direction. We have a big challenge in terms of European autonomy. We have to increase participation of citizens in Europe in financing our capital markets. To that, we have to induce more trust and move investment toward European companies. This is strategic for us. Capital has to be held by European citizens. So here we can talk about the relevance of our business, the strength of our business, European distribution. It's very different in the Anglo-Saxon world. In Europe, we have universal banks which maintain networks of branches. You can always see your advisor in a bank to get credit or to get funding or for other problems. And for savings issues, it's very different in the Anglo-Saxon world. It's very transactional there. We have to stress this. Once again, as I said, savings on the average level, it's 25,000 euros. If we see this requirement for advice, for counseling in countries where this was monetized, we see the pauperization of counseling with people who have less than 25,000 in assets. So our efforts, all of our efforts, must seek to provide more counseling, more for Europeans, for people under 35 and under 45. Two-thirds of populations on the financial market are in that category. We have seen the preponderance of crypto assets in this population. 25% go to crypto assets. Half of these investors declare that they had some financial education which is sufficient. When we ask them questions which are simple, like, for example, how does inflation behave? What will the impact be? Well, less than one-third could answer these simple questions. So we have a challenge with individuals, people who are making savings in terms of counseling for long-term investments, what distribution is best for them, whatever the products. And we see the penetration rates of passive or active rates. This concerns all the products with different types of portfolios. We have to be careful with this idea of European benchmarking. By definition, it applies to specialized funds, ESG, for example, which are more expensive to produce, but they're absolutely necessary for energy transition financing and also for participation of smaller European businesses. Thank you very much, Mr. Tanguy van der Vijve. Today, right now, a lot of experts around, but these subjects impact the entire economy, all of society. That is the future, our income, our jobs. What about this? Could you say a few words about it? Basically, we have to focus people on their retirement in Belgium. We have a mypension.com. That's our site in Belgium. And with your ID card, or your light electric ID card, you can consult online the status of your retirement pillars, your different employers, how much they have contributed in your name, and you can see exactly how much you will get as of 67 years of age. We have our problems in Belgium, but at least that works in Belgium. That's a good thing. You have to encourage people, give people incentives. The carpet Capital markets are very important here in Europe, but there's another important strategic part, namely financing retirement. If we don't do anything in terms of retirement, we will see in Europe, and in any case, in countries where the situation is critical. I'm not talking about Sweden or Denmark. Things are going well there. I'm not talking about the Netherlands. I'm talking about Cyprus, Greece. We'll have people out on the street. We have seen what happens in that case. We've seen the European leaders in that respect. I'm afraid that with an aging population, people realize that they won't have enough money to live decently once they retire at 55 or, well, 67 years. They still have 30 years to live. The people will be out on the street, and that will lead to populist parties' power. Democracy will be fragile. That will be negative for Europe, for the European project. And it's not only about the good health of our industries. So here we're talking about figures, finance. You have to talk about these questions, and people have to understand how important they are. This is important for all of us. And it's also about the states, relations between states. Politicians like to avoid risks, and governments are often in danger. So this is an issue that we have to really tackle. Thank you, Mr. General Director. I totally agree with Ms. Tongi said. I'd like to point out this. We have a big strategic challenge namely to facilitate this transition toward proper retirement. We have to organize it in a fair way, but in an ecological way, too. It has to be digital, too. The financial sector has a strategic role to play here, and all the players in the financial sector here who are represented by private players. So they agree to play this role. This has to be inclusive. It has to go in the right direction. It has to be pragmatic, too. Thank you. I see you react to Mr. Baratelli. Maybe you have a word to say. I want to say I go along with Tanguy just said. I believe that if we want to relaunch ESMA, the capital market, we have to have more radical measures in terms of retirement. And if we can go back to figures now, we have to analyze them. We have to look at them in Europe, the USA. In the USA, the market is much more developed, and here we have a less generous state system, which encourages greater investment. So that is. And the fund sector is much more greater in the USA than Europe. It's less generous in the USA. Sweden, Scandinavian countries, the retirement system is different, which encourages capital markets too. And with other aspects too, there's our competences in terms of market regulators. And then there's taxation too. There are the tax incentives. I couldn't find incentives. Well, yes. Thanks for the French term. So tax incentives then have to be included, and I think we have to think out of the box if we want to relaunch this market. Thank you, Mr. Van der Velde. I'd like to pick up on what you just said. Speaking of financial markets, taxes. Different policies, political policies, has to be done. A lot has to be done by member states. Everything can be done by the European Commission. We have to put pressure on the states so the European Commission can develop best practices, can coordinate, can put pressure on states so that the right measures are adopted. Would you like to add something? I'd like to pick up on what our friend just said. I believe that for this new wave of initiatives, I think a bottom-up approach is the right one. It's just as important as top-down. The state members have to become active in the industries too. As for details, well, we can talk about the details, but in terms of general orientation, I think we agree. Okay, Mrs. Vice President, maybe you want to conclude. This subject hasn't been totally covered, of course, but I think this is the whole tone of this morning we've seen here. You can talk about more of this during the coffee break. I'd like to thank our panelists for setting the decor, and I think they deserve a round of applause. Thank you very much.
An open window on the world. Following the sun at any time and any place. Illuminating innovation constantly. Offering solidly anchored solutions. Sharing expertise in partnership. Follow your ambitions. Discover Casis. Casis, solid and innovative.